Hey, how's it going? Today we're going to be looking at the classical defense. So the classical defense, no matter how you cut it, whether blue moves one pawn up, two pawns up, green moves one pawn up, two pawns up. This opening is very timely for red-yellow. It's very time sensitive because if red-yellow don't establish or don't make the most accurate moves, then blue and green can equalize. And so it requires a lot of precision to maintain the advantage that red-yellow have at the beginning. So one thing I've noticed in this opening, if blue and green each move one pawn up, then yellow will move this pawn up. Otherwise, if blue moves two pawns up, green moves two pawns up, or both move two pawns up, yellow will not move this pawn forward. Instead, yellow will block off with the bishop. And the reason for this is that this bishop, its purpose, yes, is to eye up this square, but further than that, it's also to come over here, attack that pawn, and also to attack this pawn. So when this pawn is moved up, that pawn is moved up, the power of this bishop is really hindered. The reason why red, no matter what opening, always moves the queen over here is that red will always move this pawn up because it slows down blue. And as you might know, when one side is slowed down, it's easier to attack the other side. So with the bishop up, that also defends the check from blue, meaning it's easier to attack green. So this is how we maintain an imbalance in this opening, by choosing to either have the queen come out and block with the bishop, or if need be, to push the pawn two spaces up. Let's go over some openings to see how these ideas manifest. So first of all, here's a trap. So the only real options for blue here in this opening: knight guard, pawn block, or queen out. Anything else, like knight over here, leads to this. Mate threat on green, has to block, take with the bishop, and that is good game. So we're going to first look at the knight guard, which I believe is one of the lesser of the openings. I think really if you're going to move one pawn up, you have to block with the pawn because it's almost inevitable. So might as well get it out of the way first. So in this variation, knight guard, pawn up, knight guard, bishop out. Now if blue thinks that he can move the queen out early, he better think again. Because now we have this threat. Something to guard against. And then you tack on this threat. Of course, green can always check red. So that's something to keep in mind. So what you do, block off the double bishop takes. Then you just check him anyway. Green moves in for the check, move the queen up. And this takes advantage of green's temporary imbalance. And now, this is a winning position for red-yellow, with the fork and the double attack on green. So that's that variation. So with the knight guard, the queen cannot come out early. Even still, it's a very tricky opening if it does not transition into the pawn-up block, which we will go over in a little bit. Here, knight guard, pawn up, knight guard. If you move the knight up, now what you're doing is you're taking into account the check threat. You're also attacking this square. And you're also eyeing up that square. So you block. And here, as I said, the other reason for this bishop to be here is to also attack this square. In doing so, you force the pawn forwards. And then you can just take, right? Because then you can push your advantages yellow. To attackers, blue's check does nothing. This is a pretty winning position for red-yellow also. So as you can see, it's very difficult for blue-green to ward off red-yellow without pushing the pawn initially, giving some leeway. Now let's look at the main line here, where you do push the pawn up. And then we'll come back to explore the other variations, where either blue or green push the pawn up 2 spaces, or both push their pawns up 2 spaces. So here's the pawn up variation. Pawn up, pawn up. Here you block off the check. And here, you move the knight up to block this check. Still push the queen anyway, if you move that knight up. So you really can't move that knight up. Here you have to move this knight up, because this is just a winning position for red-yellow. Take, take, take. What do we have here? We have a mate threat, first and foremost. Of course, not quite yet, because green can check. We also have red and yellow up a knight, and soon the king side will fall. So yes, you must move the other knight up first. Otherwise, you run into some serious trouble. Something I forgot to mention. As you saw in this variation, the red queen is very effective at forcing this pawn up 1 more space. Another reason why you don't need the yellow bishop to force that pawn up. Just a small note. So, in this variation, push the pawns up to block, prevent the check, and again, even with the knight here, still push the queen over here. And then, gain a tempo. And let's say the queen wants to come out right now. Then what you do is you go for this maneuver. This, where the queen pins the knight, attacking the king's weakest square, and attacking the knight with the pawn. This is the go-to strategy for a lot of positions in chess. Also, now that blue has some new weaknesses, things become a little bit more serious. So I think here you just push the king over. And then you really show why moving the queen out was a mistake. So here, I didn't really analyze further, because to me, I just don't see proper defense. Okay, that's not even a defense, right? So now we'll look at one more variation. Interesting. Seems in this variation, I forgot to choose the best path. So we'll look at the two different continuations down here for blue. On the sixth move, so again, queen always goes over here. It's just such an effective space for the queen. Bishop always goes over here. This is the system versus the pawn up defense. Push the pawn, queen is prepared to swing down over here, queen out. So it turns out we already looked at what happens when the queen moves out there. So the other thing I have is knight at a5 to c6. So let's say you move there first. Queen still goes in. You still push the pawn. Right? Like, how are you stopping this? And then on top of that, you have this maneuver. So, with the timing of the bishop and the queens, again, what we did is we attacked green by slowing down blue, by hampering blue. That's why, again, this pawn push is always played as red, because blue is just slow enough that not only can we attack green, but then we can also, while attacking green's king side, create a weakness on blue's queen side. And that's how we play this as red-yellow. So as stated, if it is the case that one of these two pawns move two spaces up, we do not block with this pawn. So let's look at those variations. First, we will look at the queen pawn up 2 for both sides. Now, the biggest thing to note when one side moves a pawn up 2 spaces is the weaknesses it creates on their side of the board. So here, if blue decides to move a pawn up 2 spaces, these 2 squares become a lot weaker. And we'll see how these squares become exploited. So again, we always move this pawn up, and what do? Push the bishop, slowing blue down, preparing for an attack on green, while also creating a weakness on blue's queen side as we attack the king side. So here, if green decides to push the knight, that's just a mistake because you can just take with the queen, right? Here you attack green, prevent the knight block. So here, yeah, that's just GG. So let's say you do something else to prepare for that. Here in this variation, say that you prepare for this, blocking with the pawn. Here, now you can switch your attention to blue. And now we can attack blue. And the beauty of this opening for red-yellow is its flexibility. Because as you can see, the queen moves out, we can block the check. Queen wants to move out, we can go over here now. So we attack one king side while attacking the other side's queen side. This one just kind of forces some moves, right? You take with the intention of checking red, take, check, move over, push the pawn, right? Maybe attacking the queen is better, but the queen's going to move anyway. So up 2 spaces might be the best, right? Because here you check, take, move over, take. And in this position, push the pawn. Obviously, if you push that pawn, you're just going to take and attack the rook. So another try, which might be a worse variation actually for blue-green, is you could move the rook to safety. Well, first, actually you have to prevent the knight from being taken. So here, move up. Blue does something, I guess preparing to move the knight away. You attack, move over, and that check is coming, and it's going to hurt quite a bit. So I'm not sure what you do here as blue. Maybe you're looking at this. So first you move the knight out of the way. Check. Right now if you move the bishop up, that's just going to be 2 pieces taking and only one side can take back. Keep in mind that red is already up a piece if you consider the bishops and the rooks equal. So here, you can just block with the rook. But of course, this again is looking pretty bad, and you have to prepare for that. So this is just a really good position for red-yellow. I guess here, no matter what red does, you would block the rook from coming out. I'm assuming you move the bishop back because you're probably going to be looking at some trades, right? Like maybe you will do this after take with check. There's just so many options. There are just so many options here. So this again is a winning position for red-yellow. Next, we'll look at another continuation. Okay, so again, block with the bishop. And let's say that blue just immediately moves that queen out. Now we have this one. And then you just check green, just to make sure you can take that bishop. Because, ouchie, just that hurt. Then green has to sack the queen. And then we'll look at one more variation here. I'm going in depth with these pawn up 2 variations because you never know what to expect, and I think that looking at these variations also just give you a better feel for how to play as red-yellow. Because normally we don't think about blocking with the bishop as yellow, right? Normally the go-to method is just to double pawn up. But this is a very specific way of playing against blue and green. And you really have to look at all of your options. Let's say green does something crazy like that. Here, keep in mind, we have a lot of options, and one of the options is to eye up the one weakness, or one of the 2 weaknesses in blue's camp, with the pawn being pushed up 2 spaces. And now, it's really hard for that queen to move out without getting a huge advantage as red-yellow. Right, the knight does defend. That is something to keep in mind. And with careful play, this can be tricky to convert as red-yellow. But this also attacks that pawn and prepares this checkmate on green. So yellow goes down there. And again, we just go for the standard attack. This is the go-to method. We tie down the enemy. And then we push the pawn to attack the knight on the king side. This is just the standard attack. So a queen can come out now. So what you do, move the queen over here. And this one is a little bit trickier. Right, like we are kind of attacking, but not really. It's really a tough position to call here. Because yes, we are attacking this side, but remember the knight defends this now, so things are a little bit different. So it's kind of hard to say. I haven't looked too in depth into this pawn defense. That might be something to consider in the future. In fact, I'm not even sure this is the best plan for red-yellow right here. I guess I'm also looking at this idea. Right? Like taking, take back, pushing the pawn. It gets really messy when you consider the pawn push. And when we go against players like Icy Stone, we'll probably have to really consider this variation a bit more in detail. So let's look at one more variation here. This is a long video, isn't it? There's a lot to cover in the classical variation. So here the knight moves up. The queen comes out. I was looking at this. The idea here is to slow green down, because then you could just push the knight up to defend. King has to move over because that's coming next turn. So then queen goes over here. And what are you going to do? Can't move the bishop. Yellow queen takes, red can take, yellow can take the rook with check. Move that, this becomes free. What are you going to do? Move the queen back? This is a really hard position. So again, another reason why I think if the queen pawn moves up 2 spaces, then the queen pawn defends. That might be another variation to look at in the future. So now we'll look at a few more variations. There's so much to look at here. I might just call it early here, if I think the general idea is being conveyed, to look at the remaining 2 variations in this opening. So again, queen out, bishop block, attack. You almost always attack here when blue moves only 1 space up, because it gives you that 1 extra tempo. And then, again, attack the queen side while attacking the king side. And now what happens? Pawn push. Very straightforward, very consistent. So here, yeah, this is, you know what? These next few lines are actually kind of fun. So I think you might not be too bored. I hope you don't get bored. I'm going over the same things over and over again. But let's look at a few fun variations here. There are a few attacking chances for red-yellow. This being one of them. So same idea. And again, if you cannot push the pawn easily, another idea is to move in with a knight. And so here, we're looking at some craziness. So let's say that blue pushes that pawn. Take, take, take. Yeah. So blue can't really be materialistic and passive like that. Let's look at what happens when blue becomes a bit more active in the defense. This is a wild variation. It's really fun. So let's say that green decides to push the pawn now. Now the reason why green pushes the pawn now is that if green decides to push the pawn here, well, yellow can just step back. Probably best step back here. And then red can just push the pawn anyway. Right? And the check isn't to be found. So first green has to secure a space so that the knight is just not forced off the board. And so here, pushing the pawn, why? So that we can also weaken blue side of the board. So check this out. What do? Do we save the queen? No, you can have the queen. This is not the optimal play for blue. Over here, you really have to not go for this, but you really have to take out that bishop. But it's just fun to see this anyway, right? Checkmate. Of course, playing against the players we'll play against, they're not going to play that way. They're going to play with more accuracy than that. Okay. What happens when blue is smart? I guess another variation would be to move the queen over there immediately instead of moving the queen down here. This is just a wild variation. I'm not even sure how good it is. Not that I think we'll ever play this variation specifically, but I just wanted to show that there are some really crazy ideas here. Okay, so we're almost there. Just gonna look at a couple more, and then we'll finally get to the next part of the video, where we consider the other ones. So again, one option is to move the queen down here. And we do this now because it also takes advantage of green's pawn up 2 spaces. And also force that knight up. So this is just a suboptimal variation. Okay, last one, and then we'll look at the other variations. Okay. So this is to show that there's also an option going over here. Yeah, that's also a big idea. I mean, we have this, and we have that. What are you doing here? And we have this one. So if the pawn pushes, that's also a very nice sinkhole. So hopefully these variations give you an intuitive idea of how we will play against the classical variation played classically. So we've looked at the knight guard, we've looked at the pawn push. Let's look at this other variation, the third one, before moving on to the double con variation. So there's a third variation, right? You can knight guard, you can pawn push, or move the queen out. Now, at first glance, this might seem like a really strong variation. You're defending the king side for green. Yellow loses some squares for the queen. And green's going to move over here, both attacking the rook and defending blue's king side. So our ideas in the past openings, they're just not going to work in this variation. So what's the catch? What's the downside to this variation? Well, blue and green each spent 2 moves moving their queens. So while it may seem like the knight is not well placed here, actually, it is. See, these queens, they've moved 2 times, and again, they are still poorly placed. Why is that? It's because for blue in particular, you really have to avoid that check. You have to move the queen out of the way so that either the pawn or the knight can occupy that space. You don't want to hinder your own bishop, right? And the knight would block the bishop. So this one you just play normally. And actually, blue-green have to spend a couple of moves unjumbling their pieces, which makes it kind of awkward for them. So finally, the queen moves out of the way. You have to do all this work, and then you just move the queen out of the way, right? And then you just, even after doing all that work, can still force an attack on blue. It's very difficult taking into account both the attack from the yellow side and also all the threats that are being made on the red side. Here's blue. So in this opening, you just really attack blue. And then this looks to me like a very strong position. Queen will have to move out, that square will be weak. And the imbalance is made on blue side of the board, with the yellow knight moving in for a check. So that's that opening. I don't really intend on looking at it too in depth because I don't think it's that strong. And I think we are more than capable enough of taking this opening down without further analysis. So now we're going to look at one more fun variation in the classical. What is that variation? The double con. This one. So in this variation, you really have to maintain the speed. Because remember, in any variation that's classical, it's all about a game of speed. Well, in chess in general, for red-yellow. So what do? You buy red a move. Push the bishop up. Now, if the queen comes out, then you move down here. This queen is trying to prevent the queen from moving over there. It's a very nice post. Then you can double attack that pawn. The knight moves up. And you just attack. And then you can take the knight, because even though it might seem like you have something going on, you're just knight up. So you move the bishop back over here to defend that pawn so the queen can move. And on top of that, the rook has an open file. So I'm not sure. Let me look at that again. I just moved my bishop twice, didn't I? That's funny. Maybe the bishop is better placed here immediately, instead of down there. Something to consider. At any rate, not something I'm too worried about. Again, the idea here is to get the general mood of these openings. So, if the queen moves up instead of out, because remember the queen can be attacked. right? There was this idea I didn't mention in the past opening, which was yellow attacks and red attacks. So an even further advantage. So it's really hard to move the queen anywhere. Because keep in mind, queen moves there, you could just pin as yellow. It's really hard to find a good space for the queen. So again here, double attack, push, going for check, and here's another key square. Defend and attack, while maintaining the threat. So here's a try. The queen takes, and the knight takes back. So you avoid the trade. Now you double attack green. Pawn push. Well, you just win the queen that way. So let's look at the next variation. Again, the queen moves up, allowing this wonderful square for the yellow queen. Double attack. Okay, same variation. Let's say instead of the pawn push, you move the bishop up. Here you just push that knight, because you don't want to get checked. Right, so queen moves back, past you, because you don't want yellow to take that pawn. So here you trade the queen, and what do you do as green? You can move it and get it taken, or you can just allow red to take over there. On top of that, yellow's attacking the knight. So that's a pretty obvious one. Be kind of a blunder for blue and green to play that way. Okay, we're getting close to the end, my friend. Thanks for sticking in with this very long video. So here I think the optimal move for blue is to move the knight up. You're eyeing up this wonderful square, attacking the queen and putting in a check, blocking off the check threat. It's just the best move for blue. So here, we are looking to move the knight over here. The queen moves out of the way, you can pin, and it's just a great game. So let's say that green makes the mistake of giving that square to the knight. Here, you move over there. And as blue, let's say you move the queen down. Guess one thing to consider would be, what if blue attacks the queen, right? Get double attacked. I guess in response to that, could always the queen down there. No, actually, probably would in response to that move the queen down here. For that one. Yeah, definitely one of these two squares. But probably this one because it also attacks the knight. At any rate, queen moves down over here. Now, once the yellow knight moves, red queen can just take the rook. Or attack the rook at least. Green moves first. So here, you move the bishop up. Queen still guards. Defend the pawn. So that's not really a good idea for green. Okay. Now I think this is what I saw as the most optimal variation for blue-green. Instead of attacking the knight, you move the queen knight up. And here the idea is again attack this weak square. So queen up, defends, queen down, would have been the move had the knight moved over here. Now, of course, the mate is blocked. And you attack, and what do? The go-to maneuver. Pin the knight and attack the king side. So here, now we have the check. Pawn push, block the check, pawn push. Here you can just snip off the knight. That knight is going to be troublesome. It's going to attack the red king. And you also have to prepare. Blue has no in-between moves here. Keep in mind. Move out, take, take. This allows yellow to sack the knight so the red bishop can be saved and prevent check from green. So this, I believe, is the optimal variation. I'm not quite sure how it would continue, but that's what I've seen. The one upside for green, of course, you have this open file for the rook. At the same time, you also have a very vulnerable king side, now the knight is gone. So I think all in all, again, this is a very good variation for red and yellow. And you have a whole bunch of ideas here. I'm not sure what the best is. This square is very weak. King side can be attacked. Bishop is still here. And if I'm not mistaken, that'll be it for the video. We have explored all the variations. So I'm not sure how long this video is, but thanks for sticking around. I hope that it has offered some insight into the intuitions behind this opening, the general plans. And again, the one opening that I'm not entirely sure about in terms of whether this is something we should look at in more detail or not, is when both the pawns are up and green moves this pawn up. And I will give this variation a very specific place at the top in the description of this video. So hope you liked the video, and I'll catch you next time. Peace out.